Okay, thank you for joining us today, Poway Mayor Steve Vaus, who is a candidate running against Joel Anderson in the San Diego County Supervisor's race for District 2 to replace Diane Jacob, who's been there 28 years. Is that right?
Right.
26.
26?
28.
28?
Okay, so let me start first by reading a statement from Joel Anderson. An aide sent me an email earlier this week saying, regretfully, he will not be participating in the interview process for the November election. When I talked to Joel a few weeks earlier, he struck a different tone, saying that meeting with us would be a waste of time for me and that you guys just don't have a lot of weight. So I just wanted to get that on record before we started. And you may want to talk a little bit about your opponent. It's unfortunate that he is not here. But let me start with a question for you, Mayor. Since the pandemic started and life has been difficult for a lot of people, I'm wondering two things. What you have done personally to be of service to your community at this difficult moment, and two, what you've done to make it easier as mayor for your community. So why don't you start on a personal level, on a personal note? What have you been doing for your community to be of service?
Same thing I do every time we have a challenge. I make sure that they know I'm there for them. I decided to take a little bit of a unique approach at the beginning of the pandemic, set up a web page called Angels Can Help. I was particularly concerned about vulnerable seniors and others who are more vulnerable that were really worried about going out to get groceries and taking care of basic needs. So I set up a website where people could print out a form that they could leave on their neighbor's door and offer to get groceries for them. Just to, like Poway often does, take care of each other. And I've done that in my own neighborhood. This is a dangerous virus. Nearly 200,000 dead in the US, 700 in the county, I think, give or take. We got to pay attention, but it's frightening the way small businesses are being crushed, and not so much on the personal level, but as mayor, we've taken some steps to throw a lifeline really to small businesses. We were one of the first to offer small business loans. We set aside $2 million out of our reserves that businesses could apply for long-term low-interest loans. One morning when I was out walking, one thing I've done consistently during this pandemic is walk about an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. And I was walking by one of our parks and I saw picnic tables. And I thought, wait a minute, we could offer a lifeline to restaurants if we buy some picnic tables and offer them. And we've bought over 100 now. We've got 20 plus restaurants that are using them outdoors. So that was a critical step. The other thing that I did, created what I called my SOS Initiative, sharing outdoor spaces, offering space in our parks free of charge for businesses where it was an appropriate fit for them and churches where it was a fit for them. Of course, maintaining social distancing and safe protocols, but offer them space to continue. I was pleased when that program was copied by the county and copied by the city of San Diego. So on a personal level and on a city level, been trying to think outside the box and meet people where their needs are.
Let me ask you a question about the science. And as we juggle businesses reopening and keeping people safe, I'm going to read to you a statement from your opponent that said, about this issue. I think we have to fight this with science, but unfortunately too many people are fighting it with political science. I think that we need to have a plan, execute the plan, and stick to the plan. You look at the news and it's all arbitrary. It's okay to have thousands of people rally for a cause, whether it's for Trump or it's for Black Lives, and that's okay, but if it's singing at church, oh no, we can't do that. Where do you come down on what has become a volatile issue at the county supervisors in particular, with Kristen Gaspar and Jim Desmond on one side really advocating for businesses to reopen, and Nathan Fletcher and others, deferring to the science and saying that's what should be driving this decision? How do you view that?
I think it's got to be a nuanced approach. We have to balance science and keep an eye on our small businesses that are being crushed, but science has to come first. Sadly, I think on the county level, there's been more confrontation when there needs to be conversation. Is there a middle ground? Is there a nuanced way? One of the challenges is this pandemic is not a one-size-fits-all pandemic. And, you know, it's been approached that way largely by the state and by necessity because of the state, by the county. The impacts that are being felt in San Ysidro are not the same as they're being felt in Alpine or Barrett Junction. I would like to have more local control so we can consider some of that nuance. So I wouldn't say I'm on one side or the other. I prefer a more nuanced approach. You know, I want to be a bridge builder, not a bomb thrower.
What do you think about the number? Do you trust the numbers coming from the government and Johns Hopkins University in terms of deaths and people who have become ill? Jim Desmond, another supervisor, has you know, said that some of those deaths are I think he's used the word pure when he's talking about underlying conditions.
I believe the numbers. I've got to put my faith in the numbers. I've got to put my faith in the medical professionals. I'm not going to question them.
Supervisor, one of the themes of the UT editorial board for more than a decade has been that San Diego County is run by people who think they can't make mistakes, who think they're, you know, their shit doesn't stink, excuse my language. And so in 2017, we have the hepatitis crisis. And in 2018, they release a report in which they essentially say our critics are wrong. The people who wrote this report are still in power. Is that a problem? Should the people who have this kind of obtuse reaction to a gigantic failure be in power? Should Helen go? Should we still have the same people running the county who think that their reaction in 2017 to a gigantic health crisis was appropriate?
I think that's called a leading question in the business.
You think? Let me back up a little bit. Chris, you know very well how I came into office. It was because there was a council member in the city of Poway who had abused the power of her office and cost the city a whole lot of money, and nobody else would get rid of her. So I ran a recall, knew nothing about recalls. I didn't even know where City Hall was back then, but it was the right thing to do. So is there truth to the criticism? Probably, but I doubt that it's unique to the county. You could probably say the same thing about every government body in the county and the state, probably in America. But I'm all about accessibility, transparency, responsiveness. I pride myself on my accessibility. I published my cell phone number from when I first was elected. And I expect the same, maybe not publishing their cell phone numbers, but from the organization top down, there's got to be accessibility. That applies to email retention. You know, those kind of things. We've got to be above reproach. It applies to, you know, responsiveness to PRAs, information on the outbreaks. I think the county does seem to circle the wagons, and they do pat themselves on the back historically rather than kicking themselves in the ass. You said your word, I say mine, when they need to. But nobody's perfect. When you make a mistake, you need to own it. You need to learn from it and change it. That's what I've been about from the very beginning, and I'll be that way when I'm at the county.
I wanted to ask you about something that I know is very personal to you, and I hope that you understand that I'm asking not to be disrespectful, but I want to know what your opinion is. You made headlines in a very good way for a very bad reason when there was a horrible situation that happened in Poway with the shooting at the synagogue. And later we would learn that Rabbi Goldstein was involved in some criminal activity. Did you reach out to him, and what are your thoughts on what happened there?
Poway, 514 days ago, experienced tragedy. Unlike many other cities I've ever had to face. We came together as a community, and Rabbi Goldstein was remarkable through that process. Fast forward to a few months ago, learning what he'd been doing for decades, I was sick to my stomach. I thought I knew the guy, but I didn't.
Did you reach out to him?
I did.
Can you tell us anything about that conversation?
It was a very personal and pointed conversation. That's really all I'd want to say.
Thank you.
Let me, that's a tough subject to follow. I appreciate your candor and your reluctance to share too much about it. Let me ask you about a couple other times that you've reacted in real time to things that have gone on. I think everyone gives you credit, rightfully so, for bringing the community together after that horrible shooting. On a smaller scale, there was a boil water order that Poway had to endure a year or two ago, and at the time, while the order was still in effect and there hadn't been the all clear, and there was still questions of the water's purity, you said, "It's okay, I'm drinking it," and took some flack from some folks about that. Can you walk us through your thought process on that, and do you regret that action or not?
Yeah, I told the truth. I was drinking the water. We were giving it to our animals. My family was drinking it. I was well aware that the city's testing repeatedly showed it was never out of compliance with safety standards. But in hindsight, it would have been wiser to simply urge folks to follow the state guidelines. I shouldn't have gotten out in front of it. And I got to tell you, as Poway always does, we came together during that challenge. My fellow council members and other staff and myself and volunteers were out there from dawn until dusk handing out free water, and we got through it. And I think it's also important to note, though I couldn't have known this at the time, that though the city initially received a citation from the state later withdrew that citation once they understood the facts. So should I have said that? No, I shouldn't have gotten out in front of the state. I should have kept my mouth shut. And it's a mistake I've learned from.
When you were asked that question about KUSI, you volunteered that you would change nothing about what I did. What changed between when KUSI asked that question and when I just asked it to you?
I'm not sure when KUSI asked that question. But in hindsight, I try and learn as a leader, and people were thrown off by what I did. So it wasn't the best move.
We've talked about this issue as well, although it didn't come in an editorial board interview. It came after the equivalent of this interview in the primary, where I called you and we talked a bit about your 2009 Alex Jones interview. Mm-hmm. Let me just, for the sake of the board, let them hear your answer. So in that interview, there's two things I want to run by you. The first is you said you lamented that, quote, illegals streaming across the border, unquote. Walk us through your use of that terminology and your appearance on that show generally. Obviously, that video is still out there. We endorsed you over Anderson and Kenya Taylor in the primary, but we're kind of disturbed by this interview.
Yeah. As I said to you when we spoke, I chose my words poorly and recklessly in that interview, and that was wrong. I have real concerns about our porous borders. There are folks that wish us ill, and I think in one fashion or another, we need to be sure that we control who comes into our country. There are people bringing bad things into our country. Drugs are a huge problem coming across the border, so they can't be porous. District 2 has a high number of immigrants and refugees, and they've enriched the community and contributed mightily to our business economy. I had deep reservations about the previous administration's immigration policy, and I just didn't feel like it allowed for proper vetting of people entering the country. But still, as I said to you months ago, I would say again, I expressed myself very poorly.
And let me just read the other language you used that you told Alex Jones was this quote: "The other thing that concerns me greatly is the fact that you look at the numbers of how the Muslim population of the United States is growing, and now we've got President Barack Hussein Obama saying, well, you know, we really are one of the largest Muslim countries in the world. My God, have we lost our bearings so badly? I guess for now the answer is yes." How do you square that thinking and comments with what you just said, that District 2 has a very large immigrant population that's very kind of essential to its day-to-day existence?
Yeah, you know, I don't think any administration should be choosing winners and losers at the border. And again, I chose my words very poorly, but the broader context of that question was a Christian Bible study that had gotten in trouble for having Bible studies at home, and they were told that they needed a conditional use permit, contrasted with the prior administration making it easier and I think lowering the standards in a sense for some immigrants. And I saw a real disconnect there, and it bothered me. But again, I expressed myself very poorly. It was before I ever dreamed I would run for office, but if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't.
And I appreciate that. And in that same endorsement, we brought up an incident in Joel Anderson's past, where in 2018 he told a Sacramento lobbyist that he might, quote, bitch slap her. And so I guess my question to you is, what do you say to a voter who looks at these examples alone and says, I have to choose between a bigot and a sexist? How do I do that?
Well, if Mr. Anderson's only problem were the bitch slap incident, that would be one thing. But here we have a guy who 10 years ago, when I was removing someone from office because of corruption, he was busted for laundering money into his election campaign. It cost him $170,000. Here's a guy who's left close to $80,000 in tax liens in the wake of his businesses, but he expects us to pay taxes. The bitch slap incident. One doesn't have to look too far to see distinctive differences. I might have misspoken on a couple occasions, but I never broke the law. My opponent has.
Steve, I want to go back just a minute to the immigration issue, and I want to ask you, since your district does have a lot of immigrants, did you make any trips to go see what the situation was when there were accusations that children were being separated from their families, missing, couldn't be kept track of in some of the ICE facilities? Did you visit any of those?
No, ma'am.
Why?
Well, at that point, I was simply the mayor of Poway, not running for supervisor, and I've got a full plate as mayor of Poway, and I try and stick to my jurisdiction and my issues and take care of my constituents.
But you just did say that you do have a lot of immigrants in that district. So
no, that's in District 2. District 2 has some significant differences from the city of Poway. Again, it's not out of lack of concern for those situations. You know, I remember the documentary that you did years ago about immigrants coming across the border and dying. My heart breaks over that. But I have to be able to, as a husband, dad, mayor, chair of Sandag, and many other hats that I wear, I have to be very careful in how I apportion my time.
thank you.
Let me ask you about jails and Sheriff Bill Gore. We asked you a little bit about this in the primary. What's your view currently of Sheriff Bill Gore and his oversight of county jails? I know homelessness and mental health are two of your big priorities, and those issues play into the jail population.
Well, as I said when we met the last time, you know, in terms of jail deaths, it's even one death is too many. There was recently an outside analysis or report done of the jail operation I look forward to drilling down in that and considering recommendations they made. You know, from what I'm aware of thus far, the report mentioned that initial assessments made at the time of booking are essential, and they're not happening as they should. It also said, in order to reduce in-jail mortality, we've got to be in a position to refer high-risk patients to appropriate settings, including emergency rooms. You know, there's a discussion going on now about outsourcing jail medical services versus in-house services. I'm anxious to see those proposals once they're developed, and I'd like to be part of that conversation. We've got a lot of good folks working hard there, caring for that population. We need to be sure that we're offering the best possible care. I understand the concern of families with regard to their loved ones in custody. My dad committed an armed robbery when he was a young man and spent time in a county jail. He also spent time in federal prison. Fortunately, he turned his life around and went on to do great work to keep young people out of prison. But the point is, we have a moral responsibility that I feel keenly to offer a safe environment and appropriate care for those in custody so they can either go to trial or pay their debt to society and have the opportunity to straighten out their lives.
What do you think about that proposal on mental health? Do you have an opinion at this stage, or is it too premature for you to come down on one side or the other in terms of whether
The proposal on mental health or the jail proposal? The
jail issue on handling that.
Yeah, I have not had time to really dive deep into it, but I look forward to it. And, you know, I'd like to have a voice in that conversation as decisions are made.
When you say mental health is a priority, what is your specific proposal or number one goal to improve that situation for people?
Well, you know, that's another one that's really personal to me. Mental health and homelessness are so tied together. I think I might have told you the last time we visited, you know, again, a family experience. When I was a teenager, my older sister was diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, and she lived a rough life on the streets at times. There was no safety net for her. Again, I come back to a moral responsibility. We need to make sure that we're offering care to those who need it. And we've got a long ways to go. You know, the mental health hub that Supervisor Fletcher has championed, I think, is going to be a great step in the right direction. The satellite locations, I'm disappointed that those seem to have been pushed back a bit because of the pandemic, but I think there's much more we can do and make progress.
Mayor, the Hassan Akrada thing is insane to me. The fact that Sandag has suppressed an audit that is critical of his decisions on spending. I know that perhaps you will feel like you have to be restrained in your reaction to this, but my God, he edited an audit that was critical of him. You know, how can you guys put up with this? Leading question, sorry.
You know, I said at the Sandag meeting last Friday, this is like deja vu all over again for me. In 2016, I was the one that led the call for the investigation when Sandag's numbers didn't add up. And I co-chaired the investigation subcommittee. Fast forward to the current issues. I first learned of the severance payments that were made in July of this year, nearly a year after they were made. I was livid. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on severance, and the board never knew anything about it. I immediately informed the entire board. I called a special closed session to discuss it because of the potential for litigation. At that point, I stepped back and then let the independent auditor and the audit committee do their jobs. Once they finished their reviews, I again immediately called a special meeting of the board to consider next steps. I directed staff and the independent auditor to release complete, unredacted, unmodified versions of all the documents. It was inappropriate, unacceptable for management to make changes. Independent means independent. I wanted to leave no doubt that we would be fully transparent and forthcoming. And you know, the redactions were troubling. In my view, though, the primary issue was the severance payments. So at our board meeting last Friday, I insisted on an outside legal review to be overseen by the executive committee. We need to know if any of those payments were made improperly. The public deserves to know that. There's not going to be a whitewash. The only way we can ever hope to gain the trust of the public is to be straightforward and open. And whether or not the payments were improper from a legal perspective, the executive director showed exceptionally poor judgment, and I have not minced words about that publicly or privately with him. Thankfully, the board approved my call for further investigation, as well as directed staff to work with the independent auditor to fix the problems that she identified. So I share your concern, I share your anger, but we're going to make it right. It's not going to be swept under the carpet. We're going to get all the facts out and then go from there.
What does all that mean for San Diego's climate action plan and its efforts to increase transit? The northern and eastern district have always kind of butted heads with the other districts about how much transit is needed. So where does this all go from there then?
Well, I think it makes it more challenging for us to move forward. That's why we've got to really deal with it in a straight up way. You know, as chair of SANDAG, I worked very closely with Santee Mayor Minto and El Cajon Mayor Wells, San Diego Mayor Faulkner, and other East County leaders to make sure we protect those projects that are long overdue in East County. We budgeted, I think, $92 million to improve Highway 52, Highway 67. That one's critical. We've just seen with the Valley Fire, you know, if there's a fire out in Ramona or Julian, the northeast part of the county, that Highway 67 expansion is critical, not only to get people out, but get first responders in. I'm absolutely committed to completion of the critical projects that voters were promised in 2004. Having said that, expanding transit is also important, particularly in the densely populated areas of the county. In D2, District 2, for example, the Grantville neighborhood is definitely well suited to transit, given its location near SDSU and the new stadium complex that's coming. However, other areas of the county need improved and expanded freeways and highways. Most of D2 is in that category, and I'm going to continue to fight that fight. As for the 5 big moves themselves, you know, there are some intriguing concepts there, but the price tag is eye-popping, $177 billion. You know, some context, you could buy every family in San Diego County 2 Teslas and still have a lot of money left over. So the first draft of the plan doesn't take into account also the effects of the pandemic, new work from home trends and decreased transit ridership. But broad strokes, we've got to keep the promises SANDAG made decades ago, especially the 94 125 interchange, the 67, as I talked about, and figure out how we can do both. Right now, transit is way off. This might be a great time to offer free transit passes to students and those in need. We've certainly got the capacity, but we've got a long way to go before we figure out what this regional transportation plan really should look like.
And being that it's fire season, probably the #1 goal of people in your district right now is not to have their homes burned down. So I'd like to know, how do you assess this last fire that we just had, how it was handled? And going forward, does it look like we're doing better than, it obviously looks like we're doing better than the past, but do you have ideas about things we should be doing that we're not doing now?
Well, we're blessed to have elite firefighters, CAL FIRE, Heartland, and other agencies from near and far working together to keep us safe. You know, having just fought the Valley Fire, it's an important time to remember the huge strides that the county's made in fighting wildfires more effectively. For decades, the answer from the county to the backcountry was, you're on your own. The Cedar Fire changed everything, though, because it went from the backcountry to the city. And until that fire, nobody would have thought that could happen. And much of the credit goes to Supervisor Jacob. Her leadership over the years has resulted in more assets on the ground and in the air. better communication all around. I think the county has spent about $500 million in those improvements. You know, what we experienced in 2003 can't be repeated. And I'm confident it won't. I'm delighted to have the CAL FIRE firefighter endorsement and Supervisor Jacobs endorsement. They know I'm going to stand with them to make sure they've got the training and tools needed. The other thing I want to mention is, you know, fires in East County come with unique challenges because of livestock. The Department of Animal Services and San Diego Humane Society Emergency Response Team did a remarkable job during the Valley Fire. And I know it well because my wife trains and volunteers with the Humane Society ERT. She was sending me pictures from the field as they, you know, headed towards the fire line to save animals. And fortunately, they got those animals and themselves out safely. So I think all in all, this fire was handled well. I was pleased to be able to get Lakeside Rodeo Arena open for evacuated horses and Poway Rodeo Arena on standby. You know, I believe, much like Poway, in times like this, East County comes together as family, and that's important, and they look out for one another.
How would you approach the county's climate action plan, which has not met the standard of legality, and supervisors have twice asked for it to court rulings to be appealed, and then lost those decisions? How do you approach that? How do you view the climate action plan, which obviously is a legally binding document?
Well, first, you know, as background, climate change is real. You know, if you have any doubt about it, you know, I met with Representative Garamendi, I'm sorry, on a trip to DC last year. Seems like a lifetime ago, and I heard with him how the military is planning for climate change. He spoke of the likelihood that the Marines are going to look to move the Marine Corps recruit depot here and the one from Parris Island, combine them in a location less likely to be impacted by sea level rise. So climate change is real. As far as the county's climate action plan, we got to get everybody at the table. Set egos aside, stop with the appeals. It's critical that we find a path to balance climate protections with, you know, the need for new housing, because right now we've got a de facto moratorium on building in the unincorporated county. I think we can get it done. The Mscp process brought together the building industry, wildlife agencies, environmental groups, the county, the feds, and the result was a plan that protected valuable resources, created meaningful environmental protections, and allowed the streamlining in the permit process, allowing the county to sign off for all those different parties. So I think that's a great example or roadmap for how we should approach this. I think in my experience, the folks most concerned about climate change are also really concerned about housing affordability and availability. So I think that MSCP, you know, provides a model to get the cap done. We need the will to do it.
Some of your predecessors have been in their positions there at the county, as Chris pointed out, for decades. I'm wondering, do you think that's appropriate for people to serve that long in those positions, or are these the types of jobs that people ought to be cycling in and out of more frequently?
Well, I think we had the benefit of some terrific institutional knowledge over the years. That's not a length of time, even if I were allowed to, that I would serve. I'm going to be pleased to serve a maximum of 8 years, move on, let somebody else do it. You know, I think it's important that we get different viewpoints, different life experiences, different voices that can only enrich the county's approach to solving problems.
Steve, since you met this board last time, obviously the pandemic hadn't happened and neither had Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen a lot of inequities being pointed out here in our own county. 30% Latino population, 5% Black population, and a growing Asian population. What would you do as a county supervisor, because you're going to be voting on other issues outside of your district as well, to enhance the lives of people of color in this county who've been oftentimes left out of the conversation?
Well, first of all, I fully support the Leon Williams Human Relations Commission. And I've talked about several times, I recommended a Poway High School grad to serve on it. Austin Jones, I met after he'd participated in some of the protests in Poway. That's how I came to know him. I recommended him for the Human Relations Commission because I thought it was important, you know, in the same way we talk about, you know, supervisors and new opinions, new views. I thought it was important to have someone from his generation, from his life experience, to have a voice in that effort, a seat at the table. I look forward to what suggestions Austin and others come up with. I also support the creation of the County Office of Equity and Social Justice. I look forward to seeing that get going. You know, as to systemic or institutional racism, it's there. It's massive. Blacks and other people of color, other minorities generally have lower income, lower education opportunities, lower education achievement, and we need to address that. For me, I think the first most important step is improving educational opportunities in urban areas. I think there may be opportunities to partner with the private sector or faith communities to increase mentoring programs with business interests to increase career technical education. We've got to do better. We need to change. But what we're seeing right now isn't going to be some, you know, quick flare-up as we've seen in years past. I think we're seeing sustained, you know, passionate anger that's going to continue as long as we see these tragedies wherever they are across the country, as long as certain members of our society are treated poorly. We got a long ways to go, but I have to add, 99% of our law enforcement folks are good and honorable, and you know, they're more anxious than anyone to root out wrongdoers and racism and get rid of the bad apples. I think we can be more effective than that.
Can you talk about how you might address racial tensions in District 2? You know, just recently, we've seen buildings burn down. We've seen people show up to the grocery store in KKK hoods. As a supervisor, what might be your role in combating that?
Yeah, I've read the news accounts. Whatever the cause, left wing, right wing, whatever the cause is, if anybody's encouraging violence or vigilantism or spreading hate, that can't be tolerated. You know, I saw firsthand over 500 days ago what happens when hate comes to a community. We've got to find ways to confront it, to condemn it, to move beyond it. And I think we need to do a whole lot more listening and make sure people are feeling heard. But, you know, my bottom line, any acts of violence or threats of violence or vigilantism, none of those are ever acceptable under any circumstance.
Homelessness specifically, what would you do to make life easier for the unsheltered population?
Well, you know, homelessness doesn't respect city boundaries. It's a problem all across the county. I went out to Lamar Park in Spring Valley a couple weekends ago and met with some residents who've been dealing with it firsthand, and they got involved, they got engaged. They've cleaned that park out, you know, multiple times, tons of trash cleared and tents removed. There's progress though. The county with their outreach, it was a pilot program. They've contacted over 560 folks out there. Now 304 of them, just from the unincorporated area alone, have been moved into hotel rooms. You know, but as long as there are still more folks on the streets and in riverbeds, there's going to be more to do. I've said repeatedly, I think we need to explore repurposing the old county assessor building in El Cajon. That seems like low-hanging fruit to repurpose it for short-term or senior housing. We need to look at old motels that are properly placed, or industrial properties that we can buy and repurpose. You know, it's like a three-part problem. I've spent a lot of time talking to Omar Passons about this. There's the now kind of emergency problem. There's the intermediate or transitional problem, and then the longer term need for housing. You know, in my view, housing must come with mental health and addiction treatment services. We've got to treat, you know, the totality of each individual's needs. We can and will make a difference. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, my experience with my sister, you know, I feel a call to be involved in that conversation. Supervisor Fletcher's moved us, I think, in the right direction. I look forward to working with him and the others to make more progress.
Would your approach be different depending on whether there's a Republican majority or a Democratic majority? Obviously, that's for the first time ever, and you know, at the supervisor's level, there's a question about which political party will have control of that board.
No, makes no difference to me. This is a nonpartisan office. I'm not running endorsed by either party. I view myself as a bridge builder. I've done that at Sandag. I've built coalitions, you know, with folks from both sides of the aisle. I'm delighted to be endorsed by Mayor Mary Salas from Chula Vista, Paul McNamara from Escondido, to have the support of the former mayor of Lemon Grove, who's a Democrat, Mary Sessom, Democrat council members from Lemon Grove. They see me as somebody that tries to build coalitions, always spends time listening and making sure every side of an argument gets heard, and being collaborative in every case possible. I'm never going to be seen as being a bomb thrower, you know, or a partisan. You know, my opponent, gosh, 91% of the time when he was in Sacramento, the many years he was in Sacramento, he voted on party lines with the Republican Party. I'm there to get things done for my constituents, and I don't think constituents give a lick of care whether it's a Republican or Democrat solution. Let's fix the problems.
You're also endorsed by SEIU Local 221, right?
Yes, I am.
How would you approach the contracts part of the job? Are there any groups at the county that you think are underpaid, or do you think that they're all well paid at this moment? How would you handle union contracts as they come up, and any groups particularly?
Yeah, and I'm delighted to have the endorsement of SEIU and also the United Domestic Workers and Laborers Local 89 and Southwest Carpenters 619, as well as conservative groups. I don't have enough information yet to know about the pay. I think we need a comprehensive class and comp study so that we know what's appropriate. And if we need to make adjustments, we should make those adjustments. You know, I'm famously accessible. SEIU knows that my door will always be open. We may not always agree, but we're always going to be able to have a conversation.
Any other questions from the board?
One last one. The president recently spoke of of teaching essentially patriotism in the classrooms. I'm wondering, you're kind of a patriotic guy, I believe. Does that sound like something that makes sense to you, that the federal government would kind of reach down to school districts and say, let's teach our kids American values and what it means to be an American?
I don't think we need a class on that. I think if we get engaged in our community and understand our neighbors and all the different needs, it will be instilled in us what a special nation we live in, what responsibilities come with that. I don't think we need to add, you know, one more responsibility on teachers' backs.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Why don't you give us your close, why voters should pick you and why this board should endorse you?
Well, I think there are three distinctive differences between myself and my opponent, and I would categorize them as temperament, track record, and trust. I work well with others. I try and build collaborative solutions. My track record, what I've accomplished in Poway, I think is pretty remarkable. And I think people trust me because I'm always straight up with them. I'm always transparent and accessible and accountable. You know, on a more basic level, my family's been in East County for 3 generations. And that track record I talk about, I think it uniquely qualifies me to help East County thrive. Poway's the safest city in the county, ranked #1 to raise a family. We've got the best roads, balanced budgets. We pay down our pension obligations. We're right now revitalizing our town center with new homes and restaurants and shops. We're building an $11 million, well, between 10 and 11, senior and community center. We're paying cash. Our parks and trails are the envy of the county. We're putting the finishing touches on the county's very first affordable housing project for developmentally disabled adults. We're about to break ground on affordable housing for senior veterans. In the last 2 years alone, we've expanded our open space by about 500 acres. We get things done. And all of that's come to pass on my watch as mayor. And I think it's a heck of a blueprint to bring to the county. You know, I mentioned I'm not endorsed by any political party, but I'm honored to be endorsed by Supervisor Jacob, the incumbent, as well as the majority of the Board of Supervisors, also endorsed by CAL FIRE firefighters, Deputy Sheriff's Association, United Domestic Workers, Laborers, Local 89, Southwest Carpenters, SEIU, as we talked about, the majority of the mayors in the district, the majority of council members in the district, and a bipartisan broad spectrum of leaders countywide. And I'm particularly proud of being endorsed by Father Joe Carroll. He knows a little bit about homelessness, you know, public safety, homelessness, mental health treatment. Those are going to be focuses for me. Continuing Supervisor Jacobs' fight against dumping sexually violent predators in East County. Those are all going to be right in the middle of my radar. But I think the reason folks support me is they know as supervisor, I'm going to always put people before politics. I always have, and I always will. And, you know, I look forward to serving as a supervisor and taking care of the folks in the community.
Thanks for joining us, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Thank you all. Appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.